Have you ever met someone and felt time slip through your hands? Not dramatically, not with warning, but quietly, like sand leaking through a crack you didn't know was there? Have you ever looked up after a conversation and realized the light outside has changed, the day has aged, and something irreversible just happened while you weren't paying attention? What if the strangest thing about them isn't who they are, but what happens to time when they're near you? At first, it doesn't feel frightening. It feels warm, magnetic, familiar in a way you can't explain. You sit down to talk, thinking it will be a few minutes, and suddenly your phone vibrates with messages asking where you've been all evening. You laugh it off. You say time just flew. But later, when you try to remember what you talked about, the details feel thin, like a dream that evaporates the moment you wake up. You remember the emotion, the intensity, the pull, but not the sequence, not the structure, not the hours that vanished while you were still breathing, still blinking, still alive. We are taught that time is constant. Seconds tick forward obediently. Clocks don't lie, but your body knows something your watch doesn't. Your nervous system keeps a different calendar, and sometimes, when certain people enter your life, that calendar starts tearing pages out without asking permission. You tell yourself it's chemistry, or excitement, or stress, or love. You tell yourself this is what connection feels like, but a quiet unease begins to form, almost beneath language. Why do days feel shorter now? Why do weeks collapse into a single blur? Why does your life seem to exist in before and after conversations with them, as if they've become a kind of gravitational center your routines orbit around? Think about the last time you felt truly present, not stimulated, not entertained, present. Think about how slow that moment felt, how dense, how full. Presence stretches time, absence compresses it, and some people, without touching you, without raising their voice, without doing anything overtly harmful, have a way of pulling you out of presence entirely. Around them, time doesn't just pass, it thins. Physics already tells us that time is not the rigid ruler we imagine it to be. Move fast enough, and time slows. Sink deep enough into gravity, and seconds stretch. The universe itself admits that time bends under certain conditions. But what if there are smaller, quieter distortions happening every day? Not in space, but in the space between two people. What if human attention, stress, anticipation, and emotional charge can curve time in ways that don't show up on instruments, only in memory? Because memory is where time truly lives. Not on clocks, not on calendars. Time is written into us through recall, through narrative, through the stories our brain stitches together to say, this happened, then this, then this. When that stitching becomes sloppy, when the thread snaps and skips entire sections, time doesn't feel longer or shorter. It feels stolen. Around some people, your mind stops recording cleanly. Not because you're bored, not because you're distracted, but because your cognitive resources are being pulled inward, hijacked, reallocated. You're listening more intensely, monitoring more carefully, anticipating reactions, reading micro-expressions, adjusting yourself in real time, and all of that processing costs something. It costs the slow, stable encoding that turns moments into memories. This is why, later, when you try to remember what happened, you don't find scenes, you find impressions, heat without light, sound without words, a sense that something important happened, but no clear footage of it ever existed. And when memory collapses, time collapses with it. You may notice small symptoms first. You're more tired than you should be. You keep meaning to do things, but days vanish before you start. Your routines loosen. Meals happen at odd hours, sleep shifts. You feel busy without being productive, full without being fulfilled. Life begins to feel like it's happening just slightly out of reach, as if you're always arriving after the moment has already passed, and yet you're drawn back. Because around them, there is intensity, a kind of compression that feels meaningful, like your life is finally being edited down to only the important parts. Everything else fades into the background. Errands, plans, even other people lose their weight. You tell yourself this is focus, or passion, or destiny. But quietly, invisibly, your days are getting shorter. There is a wordlessness to this experience that makes it hard to warn others. How do you explain that someone doesn't hurt you, doesn't control you, doesn't obviously manipulate you, but somehow leaves you with less time than you remember having? How do you describe the eerie feeling of looking back at a month and seeing only a handful of vivid moments, all of them involving the same person, while the rest of your life dissolves into fog? Human beings evolved to measure time by change, by sunsets and hunger and fatigue, by the slow accumulation of experience. When change becomes too intense, too constant, the brain adapts by compressing. It starts skipping frames. This is why trauma distorts time. This is why stress accelerates it. And this is why certain social environments make years feel like weeks in retrospect. But what happens when that environment is a person? What happens when someone becomes the dominant variable in your internal equation? When your nervous system learns that being around them requires heightened alertness, emotional calibration, constant interpretation, your body responds as if it's under mild threat, not fear, but uncertainty. Cortisol rises, attention narrows. The present moment becomes something to survive rather than inhabit. And survival mode has no patience for detail. In survival mode, the brain records outcomes, not journeys. It remembers what mattered, not how long it took. And later, when you exit that state, you don't get the missing time back. You just notice that your life advanced without your consent. This is the unsettling possibility we're circling. That some people act like accelerators, not by supernatural design, but by the way they reorganize your inner world. Around them, your priorities shift, your sense of self bends, your attention collapses inward. And when attention collapses, time contracts with it. You might recognize this in relationships that felt consuming, in friendships where conversations stretched late into the night, night after night, until months passed and you couldn't remember what else you'd done that year, in workplaces dominated by a single personality that made every day feel urgent, intense, and exhausting, in family dynamics where one person's mood dictated the emotional weather, forcing everyone else into constant adjustment. At the time, it feels like living fully. In retrospect, it feels like you blinked and aged. There is something deeply existential about realizing that time is not only taken by events, but by states of mind. That your life can be shortened not by death, but by compression. That you can live the same number of years and experience vastly different amounts of time depending on who you spend it with. This raises a quiet, uncomfortable question. How much of your life do you actually remember living? If time is the raw material of existence, then memory is its archive. And anything that erodes memory erodes life itself. Not violently, not visibly, but persistently. Like a leak you only notice when the reservoir is already low. Some people enter your story like chapters. Others enter like edits. They cut. They condense. They remove the pauses where reflection and integration happen. And without those pauses, life speeds up. Not because it's fuller, but because it's thinner. None of this means intent. This is not about villains or blame. Many time accelerators don't know what they are doing. Some are simply intense, some are chaotic, some are wounded, some are charismatic in a way that demands attention. Some are unpredictable, which forces your brain to stay alert. Some mirror your own unresolved patterns so perfectly that you disappear into them. But intention doesn't change impact. And the impact is this. When you leave their presence, you feel like you've been gone longer than you should have been, as if you traveled somewhere without moving, as if part of your life happened off screen. The most haunting part is how normal it feels while it's happening. You don't hear alarms, you don't see distortions, you just keep going, assuming this is what adulthood feels like. That time is supposed to move faster now, that this is maturity, that everyone feels this way. But not everyone does, and not all time accelerates equally. Some moments expand you, others compress you. Some people give you more life than you arrived with. Others quietly take pieces of it, not out of malice, but out of gravity. And gravity doesn't announce itself. You only feel it when you try to leave. So, before we go further, sit with this question, not urgently, not defensively, but honestly. Who in your life makes time feel fuller when you leave them? And who makes it feel like something just slipped away? Because if time really does behave differently around certain people, then understanding that difference might be the first step toward reclaiming years you didn't know you were losing. Why is it that when you try to remember those lost hours, your mind doesn't resist? It simply returns nothing? Not confusion, not static, just an absence. Like opening a folder you know exists, only to find it empty. Have you noticed how different that feels from ordinary forgetting? Forgetting feels blurry. This feels clean, surgical, as if the time was never written into you at all. Most people assume memory loss is a failure, a weakness, a sign of distraction or lack of attention. But what if that assumption is backwards? What if the moments you can't remember aren't the moments you weren't paying attention, but the moments you were paying too much? Think carefully about the difference. When you're bored, your mind wanders. It drifts, it fragments, it hops between thoughts. Later you might not remember much, but you remember the wandering itself. You remember checking the clock. You remember wanting the moment to end. There's a texture to that emptiness, a grain. But the missing time around certain people has no grain, no edges, no internal landmarks. You don't remember waiting. You don't remember checking the time. You don't remember deciding to stay longer. You simply arrive at later, like a cut in a film. One scene ends, another begins. The middle is gone. Neuroscience has a quiet explanation for this, and it's more unsettling than supernatural theories. Your brain does not record reality continuously. It records selectively. It decides, moment by moment, what is worth encoding and what can be discarded. And the currency it uses to make that decision is not importance, it's stability. Memory needs calm, it needs repetition, it needs breathing room. The hippocampus, the structure responsible for forming long-term memories, works best when the environment is predictable enough to allow consolidation. When things move too fast, too intensely, or too emotionally, memory formation doesn't improve. It degrades. This is why people remember childhood summers as endless. Days were repetitive. Sensory input was rich, but not threatening. Time had room to stretch. And this is why adults remember stressful periods as compressed. New jobs, toxic relationships, chaotic households, high-pressure environments. The brain is too busy managing the present to archive it properly. Now, imagine a person who brings that pressure with them. Not loud pressure, not obvious conflict, but a constant emotional demand, a need to be understood, a need to be mirrored, a need to be anticipated. Around them, your brain shifts into high-resolution monitoring mode. You track tone, you track mood, you track timing, you adjust yourself in real time, again and again, without ever consciously deciding to do so. From the outside, it looks like engagement, connection, chemistry. From the inside, it's cognitive overload, and overload has a cost. The brain starts cutting corners. It stops laying down long-term memory traces and prioritizes short-term responsiveness instead. You become excellent at being present in the moment, but terrible at remembering it later. Not because the moment wasn't meaningful, but because it was too demanding. This is why the missing time doesn't feel wasted. It feels intense, charged, alive. But intensity is not the same as depth. Fire burns bright and leaves ash. A slow flame warms and endures. When memory skips happen, they often arrive with companions. Fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. A subtle flattening of days. A sense that life is speeding up without becoming richer. You might start saying things like, "I don't know where the time went," more often. You might feel older without having clear milestones to justify it. And yet, you may defend the very person associated with this feeling. You might insist they're special, that they make life exciting, that they pull you out of monotony. And maybe they do. But excitement and acceleration are not the same as expansion. Here is where the idea becomes uncomfortable, because if someone accelerates your time, they don't just affect how fast life feels while you're with them, they affect how much of your life you get to keep afterward. Memory is the only proof you were there. Without it, experiences evaporate. You don't grow from them. You don't integrate them. You don't build a coherent narrative. You just move on, carrying an emotional residue you can't fully explain. This is why certain periods of life feel strangely hollow in retrospect. You know they mattered, you know things happened, but you can't access them. They feel like someone else's story, like borrowed time you never fully owned. And when a person becomes the primary trigger for this state, your life begins to organize itself around gaps. You might notice that your sense of time returns when you're alone. Days feel longer again. Boring, maybe, but solid, textured. You remember what you did. You can reconstruct the sequence. The hours have weight. Then you see them again, and the compression resumes. like stepping into a fast-moving current after standing on shore. This contrast is important because it tells us something crucial. The problem isn't time itself. It's the state you enter around certain people. Psychologists sometimes describe this as attentional capture. When a stimulus becomes so dominant that it monopolizes cognitive resources. Usually we talk about this in terms of phones, screens, or emergencies, but human beings can be stimuli too, especially unpredictable ones, especially emotionally salient ones. Unpredictability is the key. The brain hates uncertainty. It will sacrifice almost anything to reduce it, including memory, including time. When someone is inconsistent, emotionally volatile, intensely validating one moment and distant the next, your brain stays on high alert. It keeps asking, what's coming next? What do they need from me? How should I respond? That constant recalibration leaves no room for reflection, no pauses, no consolidation. Life becomes reactive, and reactive living collapses time. This doesn't require cruelty. It doesn't require abuse. It only requires imbalance. One person pulling more attention than they return. One person shaping the emotional field more than others are allowed to. One person becoming the reference point for meaning. And once meaning centralizes, everything else fades. This is how weeks turn into hours. Not because nothing happened, but because everything happened too close together, too tightly, with no space to breathe. There is a quiet tragedy in this, because from the inside, it feels like living intensely. From the outside, it looks like time slipping away. And here's the most disturbing part. Your brain adapts. It normalizes acceleration. It recalibrates its sense of pace. So, when you finally step out of that environment, when the person leaves or the relationship ends or the dynamic shifts, time feels wrong again. Days feel too long. Silence feels heavy. You feel restless, unmoored, as if something essential is missing. What's missing is not them. It's your stolen sense of duration. You may mistake this discomfort for longing, for loss, for love, but often, it's withdrawal from acceleration. Your nervous system has been living in fast forward. Slowing down feels unbearable at first, like silence after noise, like darkness after bright light. This is why people return. Not because they were fulfilled, but because they were conditioned. And this is why the memory gaps matter. They are not flaws, they are evidence. Evidence that your mind was pushed into a state where time could not be fully lived, only endured. As we move forward, we're going to examine how this acceleration works at deeper levels, how biology, stress hormones, and attention interact, how some people unknowingly become catalysts for time loss, and how to tell the difference between a connection that expands your life and one that quietly consumes it. Because once you see how time disappears, you can start noticing where it goes. What if the feeling you've been chasing your whole life, the sense that time is speeding up, is not a mystery of aging, but a clue you've been ignoring? What if the universe has been quietly demonstrating, again and again, that time was never a single river flowing at the same speed for everyone, but a field, elastic, responsive, shaped by forces both visible and invisible? Physics has always whispered this truth, long before psychology caught up. Time is not absolute. Einstein showed us that clearly. Move faster, and your clock ticks slower. Fall deeper into gravity, and seconds stretch. Two observers can experience different durations between the same events and both be correct. The universe allows this. It is built this way. Time bends under pressure. But here's the question. No equation answers directly. What counts as pressure? We think of pressure as mass, velocity, gravity, but pressure is also stress, anticipation, fear, desire, focus. These may not curve space-time in a measurable way, but they absolutely curve experience. And experience is the only time a human being ever truly knows. Inside your brain, time is not measured in seconds. It is measured in change. Neurons fire, hormones rise and fall. Attention locks on and releases. When change is gradual, time feels spacious. When change is rapid, time collapses. This is why novelty accelerates life. This is why chaos makes years vanish. And this is why certain people, by the way they pull you into constant internal motion, can become accelerators without ever intending to be. Your brain is an energy manager. It evolved under scarcity. It constantly asks a simple question: where should resources go right now? Most of the time, the answer is balanced. Some energy goes to perception, some to memory, some to planning, some to rest. This balance is what gives time its texture, its thickness. But when something demands priority, real or perceived, that balance breaks. Around certain people, your system receives a signal: pay attention now, stay alert, don't miss this. And so, energy floods into the present moment. Memory encoding is postponed, reflection is delayed. The future narrows to the next interaction, the next response, the next adjustment. You live closer to the surface of time. This state can feel intoxicating, alive, as if life has finally sharpened into focus. But sharpness comes at a cost. A blade cuts by removing material. Intensity removes duration. In neuroscience, there is a concept called temporal compression. Under high cognitive load, the brain groups sequences of events into single chunks to reduce effort. Instead of recording 10 distinct moments, it records one generalized impression. This is efficient, it is adaptive, and it is devastating to the subjective sense of time. Because later, when you look back, you don't see 10 moments, you see one. And your life feels shorter because, in memory, it is. Now, imagine this happening not during a single crisis, but as a lifestyle. Imagine a person whose presence consistently pushes you into this compressed state. Conversations are intense, emotions are heightened, outcomes feel important. You're always leaning forward slightly, internally, always engaged, always reacting. From the outside, this looks like connection. From the inside, it's sustained acceleration. And here is where cosmology offers a haunting metaphor. In astrophysics, there are objects so dense that time itself slows near them. Black holes, massive bodies that warp space-time simply by existing. You don't have to touch them, you don't have to fall in. Just being close is enough to alter the flow. Some people function like emotional mass. Their inner world is dense, their needs are heavy, their presence bends the psychological space around them, and without realizing it, you adjust your orbit. The closer you get, the faster everything else seems to move. This doesn't make them evil. Mass is not malicious. Gravity is not cruel. But proximity has consequences. And one of those consequences is time distortion. You may notice that when you're away from them, life feels strangely slow, almost unbearable at first. The silence stretches. Minutes feel long. You fidget. You check the clock. You feel restless, as if something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. You've simply returned to normal temporal density after living in a compressed field. This is why people often confuse acceleration with meaning. A fast life feels full because it's loud, because it demands attention, because it leaves an afterimage. But fullness is not volume. Fullness is integration. A life that moves too quickly cannot be integrated. It cannot be digested. It passes through you like a flash of light, bright, unforgettable, but gone before it nourishes anything. Consider how different time feels in states of deep calm, meditation, solitude, nature, long walks without stimulation. Time slows not because nothing is happening, but because nothing is demanding immediate response. The brain relaxes its grip, memory resumes its work. Moments settle into place. Now compare that to how time behaves around someone who keeps you emotionally leaning forward, who triggers anticipation, who keeps the future unresolved, who introduces just enough uncertainty that your nervous system never fully powers down. You are not living slower or faster. You are living thinner. And thin time is dangerous because it feels efficient. You cover ground quickly. You experience intensity. But you don't accumulate wisdom at the same rate. Wisdom requires slowness. It requires replay. It requires the luxury of reflection. Without that, life becomes a series of reactions rather than a coherent journey. This is why people often emerge from accelerated periods feeling older but not wiser. Exhausted but unsure why. Full of memories but unable to articulate lessons. Time passed, but it didn't deepen them. Here is the existential weight of this realization. If time is shaped by attention, and attention is shaped by relationships, then who you give your attention to is who shapes your life's length. Not in years, but in lived density. Two people can both live 80 years. One experiences those years as a long, unfolding narrative. The other experiences them as a blur of urgency and intensity. Same lifespan, different amounts of life. And this difference often begins not with major events, but with who you sit across from, who you think about when you wake up, who occupies the quiet spaces in your mind, who pulls you out of yourself and into constant engagement. Time accelerators don't announce themselves. They don't carry warning labels. They feel like catalysts, like awakenings, like the antidote to boredom. And in a world terrified of slowness, that makes them incredibly seductive. But the universe is clear about one thing. Acceleration always has a cost. Energy spent in one direction cannot be spent in another. Attention poured outward cannot be used to build inward continuity. Time experienced as urgency cannot be remembered as meaning. This doesn't mean you must avoid intensity. It means you must understand it. It means learning to ask a question most people never ask until it's too late. Does this person expand my sense of time or compress it? Because expansion feels quieter, less dramatic. It doesn't hijack you. It doesn't erase hours. It leaves you with more than you started with clarity, with memory, with a sense that time, though passing, is not slipping away. As we move into the next segment, we'll descend from physics into the body itself, into stress hormones, survival chemistry, and the biological mechanisms that turn acceleration into addiction. Because once your system learns fast time, it doesn't let go easily. Have you ever noticed how your body reacts before your mind understands what's happening? A subtle tightening in the chest, a breath held a fraction too long, a feeling of alertness that doesn't quite turn off. Long before you tell yourself that everything is fine, your nervous system has already made a different decision. It has decided to stay ready. This is where time acceleration stops being abstract and becomes biological. Inside your body, there is an ancient system whose only job is to keep you alive. It does not care about happiness. It does not care about meaning. It cares about threat, opportunity, and survival. When this system senses unpredictability, especially social unpredictability, it releases chemicals designed to sharpen attention and speed reaction. Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. These are not villain molecules. They are tools, but tools, when used constantly, reshape the hand that holds them. Around certain people, your body learns a pattern. It learns that rest is premature, that calm is unsafe, that something important could happen at any moment. A shift in tone, a change in mood, a withdrawal, a reward. And so, your system stays lightly activated hour after hour, day after day. This is not panic. Panic is loud. This is quiet vigilance, the kind that drains you without announcing itself. In this state, your body prioritizes speed over depth, reaction over reflection. The present moment becomes a narrow tunnel rather than an open field. And when life is lived inside a tunnel, time has nowhere to spread out. This is why stress makes time feel fast. Not because there is less time, but because your awareness is compressed into a thin slice of now. The future becomes the next interaction. The past becomes irrelevant. You live in a perpetual almost, always bracing, always adjusting. Your brain rewards this state at first. Dopamine spikes with novelty, with intensity, with unpredictability. You feel awake, sharp, engaged. It can feel like purpose, like finally being alive. But dopamine does not build life, it chases it. And chasing creates speed. Slow states, contentment, safety, gentle connection, don't flood the brain with dopamine. They release oxytocin, serotonin, chemicals of bonding and stability. These are quieter, they don't thrill, but they allow time to accumulate. They allow memory to settle. They allow you to inhabit your life rather than sprint through it. Here is the trap. Acceleration feels like progress. Calm feels like stagnation, especially if you've been conditioned to equate intensity with meaning. So when someone keeps your nervous system slightly elevated, just enough to feel alive, not enough to feel alarmed, you mistake activation for connection. You mistake vigilance for care. You mistake the rush of stress chemistry for passion, and your body learns. It adapts. It begins to associate that person with aliveness, with movement, with momentum. When they are absent, the chemistry drops, time slows, the world feels dull. You feel restless, even empty. Not because something is missing, but because something finally stopped pushing you. This is how acceleration becomes addictive. Your nervous system does not crave the person. It craves the state, the heightened alertness, the narrowed focus, the sense that something important is always about to happen. And once your body learns to live this way, normal time feels unbearable. This is why people say they feel lost after leaving intense relationships, why days feel too long, why silence feels heavy, why boredom feels like pain. Their system has been trained to move fast. Slowness feels like withdrawal, but here is the quiet truth most people never hear. Boredom is not emptiness. It is unoccupied time returning to its natural width. It is the space where memory forms, where identity stabilizes, where life stops accelerating and starts deepening. When acceleration dominates, aging accelerates too. Not in wrinkles or years, but in exhaustion. Chronic stress shortens telomeres, disrupts sleep, blunts joy. It makes the body feel older than it is because it has been running without rest. Time hasn't just moved faster, it has taken more from you per second. And yet, because this process is gradual, because it feels normal from the inside, you rarely notice until the contrast appears, until you step away, until the body finally exhales. And in that exhale, you realize how long you've been holding your breath. This is the danger of time accelerators. Not that they harm you directly, but that they train your body to live in a state where time cannot be fully lived. And once you understand this, a new question emerges, one that shifts the focus away from blame and toward awareness. How do certain people become powerful enough to hold your nervous system hostage? What gives them that gravity? To answer that, we have to look beyond biology and into social dynamics, into charisma, emotional dominance, and the invisible hierarchies that shape whose time matters and whose gets sacrificed. Have you ever noticed how some people don't just enter a room, they reorganize it? Conversations tilt toward them, energy shifts, other voices soften or disappear. Without saying a word, they become the reference point, not through force, but through gravity. This is where time acceleration stops being personal and becomes social. Human beings are exquisitely sensitive to hierarchy, even when no one names it. We feel it in posture, in tone, in who speaks without interruption and who waits. We feel it in whose emotions set the temperature and whose are quietly adjusted to fit. And when one person consistently becomes the emotional center of a group, time begins to curve around them. Sociologists call this dominance. Psychologists call it centrality. But lived from the inside, it feels like something else entirely. It feels like your inner clock syncing to someone else's rhythm. Around socially gravitational people, you stop moving at your own pace. You move at theirs. This doesn't require arrogance. Some of the strongest gravitational figures are wounded, chaotic, intensely expressive, or deeply uncertain. Their inner turbulence spills outward, and everyone nearby unconsciously compensates. They soothe, they stabilize, they adapt. And adaptation costs time. Every adjustment is a micro-decision. Every micro-decision steals a fraction of attention, and attention, fragmented enough times, shatters duration. You may notice this in groups where one person's mood dictates the entire atmosphere. If they're happy, the room relaxes. If they're anxious, everyone becomes alert. If they're distant, people work harder to reconnect. No one agrees to this arrangement. It emerges. And once it does, it becomes invisible. Life around a gravitational person feels busy even when nothing is happening. You're always orienting, always checking, always calibrating, and because these processes happen below conscious thought, you don't label them as effort. You just feel tired. And time, again, speeds up. This is how a person becomes a timeline. Your days begin to revolve around when you will see them, hear from them, interact with them. Other events shrink. Other relationships fade. Not because they matter less, but because they don't exert the same pull. Your internal narrative narrows. Life becomes a sequence of moments connected to one central figure, with everything else dissolving into background noise. In this state, you're not living alongside time, you're orbiting it, and orbits are efficient, they conserve energy, but they also repeat, over and over, same paths, same loops, same accelerations near the center. From the inside, it feels like movement. From the outside, it looks like stasis disguised as speed. This is why accelerated lives often feel stagnant in retrospect. So much motion, so little progression. Charisma plays a role here. Charisma is not charm. It's intensity plus unpredictability. A charismatic person feels consequential. Being around them feels like something important is happening, even when nothing concrete is. Your brain marks their presence as significant, and significance compresses time. So does emotional asymmetry. When one person needs more reassurance, more attention, more emotional labor, the exchange becomes unbalanced. The giver enters a reactive role. The receiver sets the pace. And reactive roles accelerate time because they eliminate pause. You don't decide when to respond. You respond when prompted. This is the hidden structure behind many accelerated years. Not abuse, not drama, just quiet, ongoing asymmetry. And because humans are meaning makers, we rationalize it. We tell ourselves this is love, loyalty, responsibility, chemistry. We say things like, they just need me, or I'm the only one who understands them, or it's complicated. And it is complicated. But complexity does not negate cost. The cost is this. When your time becomes organized around someone else's emotional gravity, you stop experiencing your life as a continuum. You experience it as a series of demands. And demands do not leave room for memory. Later, when you try to recall those years, you don't find stories. You find effort. You find exhaustion. You find the vague sense that you were always busy but rarely present. This is not a moral failure. It is a structural one. And the most dangerous part is how noble it can feel while it's happening. Humans are wired to care, to attune, to help regulate each other. But when regulation becomes one-sided, it becomes consumption. Not intentional, but real. Time accelerators thrive in this imbalance. Often unknowingly, they feel alive, supported, anchored, while others feel rushed, foggy, older than they should. And because no one names time as the casualty, it continues. As we move forward, we'll look at what happens when this dynamic breaks, when the gravitational center disappears, when the orbit collapses, and why the aftermath often feels like free fall, even when nothing is technically wrong. Because the moment you leave accelerated time, the silence can be terrifying. When the center disappears, the first thing you notice is not relief. It is disorientation. Time does not slow gently, it drops. Like an elevator whose cables were cut without warning. One moment, days were slipping past you effortlessly. The next, a single afternoon feels unreasonably long. The clock hasn't changed. You have. This is what happens when your body exits sustained acceleration. Your nervous system, having spent months or years in heightened readiness, does not immediately trust the quiet. It scans for the familiar signals that once kept it alive. Messages, moods, fluctuations, urgency. When they don't arrive, the system panics softly. Not with fear, but with restlessness. With the sense that something essential has gone missing. People often mistake this phase for grief, and sometimes it is. But more often, it is withdrawal. The chemistry that once made time race, dopamine spikes from unpredictability, cortisol from vigilance, has fallen away. In its absence, the slower rhythms of ordinary life return. And ordinary life, when you've been living in fast forward, can feel intolerable. This is why people return to accelerators. Not because they were fulfilled, but because slowness feels like emptiness when you've forgotten how to inhabit it. Your body was trained to live in urgency, to treat every interaction as consequential, to stay prepared. And preparation compresses time because it eliminates the present. You are always leaning into what comes next. When that pressure lifts, the present floods back in all at once. Silence becomes loud. Minutes stretch. You notice sensations you didn't have time to feel before. Hunger, fatigue, loneliness, thought. And thought is slow. This is where many people turn away. They distract themselves. They seek new accelerators, new people, new crises, new obsessions. Anything to make time move again. Anything to avoid the unbearable weight of duration. But this weight is not punishment. It is restoration. Time is returning to its natural thickness. There is a reason trauma survivors often describe boredom as terrifying. Trauma teaches the nervous system that danger comes in silence, that stillness precedes harm. Accelerated environments replicate this pattern in subtle ways. They keep you moving so you don't have to feel, but feeling is where life actually happens. When time slows, memory resumes. You start noticing patterns. You begin to integrate experiences instead of reacting to them. You start remembering what you want, not just what is required, and this integration is uncomfortable because it forces reckoning. You may suddenly see how much of your life was organized around someone else's gravity, how many choices you postponed, how many parts of yourself went quiet, how many seasons you cannot fully recall. This realization can be devastating, and this is why acceleration is seductive. It postpones grief, but grief delayed does not disappear. It waits. Here is the paradox. The faster time moves, the less you have to face. The slower it moves, the more becomes visible. Slowness reveals. Speed conceals. This is why accelerated lives often feel empty once they stop. Not because they were meaningless, but because they were unprocessed. The meaning was never allowed to settle. Your body knows this before your mind does. It resists stillness. It fidgets. It urges you to fill space, to scroll, to text, to recreate urgency. But if you can stay, if you can remain in the discomfort long enough, something remarkable begins to happen. Time becomes yours again. Days start to develop edges. Mornings feel distinct from evenings. You remember conversations. You notice growth. Not dramatic growth, but quiet accumulation. The kind that doesn't thrill, but endures. This is where the idea of time theft becomes clear. Not as an accusation, but as an insight. Time accelerators don't steal by taking. They steal by preventing ownership. By keeping you so occupied with reaction that you never fully inhabit your own duration. And once you see this, another question emerges, deeper and more unsettling than the last. Why do some people need to live at accelerated speeds in the first place? What happens inside a person who cannot tolerate slow time? To answer that, we have to turn the lens inward, toward identity, toward emptiness, toward the fear that emerges when there is nothing left to chase. Why does slow time feel dangerous to some people? Not boring, not inconvenient. Dangerous, as if stillness itself might expose something they've been running from their entire lives. Because for many, acceleration is not a habit, it's a defense. There are people who cannot tolerate unoccupied time. When the noise fades, when schedules loosen, when no one needs them, and nothing demands response, an unease rises that has nothing to do with the present moment. It is older, deeper. It comes from unanswered questions they've learned to outrun rather than resolve. Who am I when I'm not reacting? What remains when no one is watching? What do I feel when nothing is happening? For some, these questions are unbearable. So they keep time moving. Acceleration becomes identity. Busyness becomes proof of worth. Intensity becomes meaning, and other people become fuel. This is not cruelty, it is survival. If a person has never learned how to exist in slow time, time that allows thought, reflection, and memory to accumulate, then stillness feels like collapse, like being left alone with an unfinished self. So, they generate momentum, conversations that run late, emotional stakes that stay high, problems that never quite resolve, futures that are always just out of reach. And when you step into their orbit, you step into that strategy. Their speed becomes contagious, not because they demand it explicitly, but because the system they live inside pulls others into motion. You start keeping up. You start responding faster. You start living closer to the surface of now. And the faster you move, the less you notice what's being lost. This is why time accelerators often feel hollow when observed from a distance. Not empty in a dramatic way, but restless. They move from connection to connection, project to project, intensity to intensity, leaving very little behind that has settled. Their lives look full, but strangely weightless. Entropy offers a powerful lens here. In physics, entropy describes the tendency of systems to move from order to disorder, to spread energy until nothing remains concentrated enough to do work. Time is entropic. Life is entropic. Every moment spent is energy that cannot be reclaimed. But living systems resist entropy by creating structure, memory, meaning, continuity. These are forms of order. They slow decay by organizing experience. Acceleration fights entropy by pretending it doesn't exist, by burning energy faster, brighter, louder. But this doesn't stop entropy. It accelerates it. A life lived too quickly ages faster internally. Not in years, but in depletion. People who live in constant motion often feel ancient at surprisingly young ages. Not wise, just tired. And because they feel this depletion, they seek more stimulation, more connection, more intensity, anything to outrun the quiet awareness that something is wearing thin. This is where the darkest realization emerges. Some people don't just accelerate time around others, they borrow it. Not consciously, not maliciously, but structurally. They draw vitality from engagement, from reaction, from being the center of attention, the source of urgency, the emotional focal point. When others orient around them, they feel alive. When others slow down, they feel threatened. So they keep things moving. And if you are empathic, attentive, or unresolved in your own need for meaning, you may step into this role willingly. You may offer your attention, your responsiveness, your time, believing you are building something together. But what you are often building is motion, not depth. This is why accelerated relationships often end without clear closure. There is no natural stopping point, no resolution, just exhaustion. One day the system collapses under its own speed, and both people are left staring at the wreckage, unsure what actually happened. Time was spent. Energy was burned. But meaning never had a chance to crystallize. The tragedy is not that time passed quickly. Time always passes. The tragedy is that it passed without being lived fully. Here is the quiet counter-truth most cultures never teach. A meaningful life is not a fast life. It is a well-recorded one. A life where experiences have time to imprint, to be remembered, to become part of a coherent self. Slow time builds identity. Fast time erodes it. And this brings us to the most important turning point of this entire exploration. Because once you recognize acceleration, once you understand its sources and its costs, the question is no longer who is accelerating your time. The question becomes, how do you stop participating? Because no accelerator works alone. It requires a surface to press against, a system to feed, a person willing, often unknowingly, to trade duration for intensity. Breaking this pattern does not require confrontation. It requires withdrawal of fuel, attention reclaimed, pace protected, boundaries placed not around people, but around time itself. In the next segment, we will examine how to recognize acceleration while it's happening, not years later, how to feel the early warning signs in your body and memory, and how to distinguish between connections that deepen your life and those that quietly consume it. Before you can protect your time, you have to learn how to see it disappearing in real time, not in hindsight, not years later when the blur has already hardened into regret, but in the moment while the acceleration is happening, quietly, politely, disguised as normal life. The earliest signals are never dramatic. They are subtle sensations most people ignore because they seem harmless. A constant feeling of being slightly behind. Not late in a literal sense, but behind yourself. You wake up already catching up. Your days feel full yet strangely empty of landmarks. When asked what you did this week, you answer in generalities. You were busy. You talked. You handled things. The specifics slip away. This is not forgetfulness. This is time thinning. Your body often notices first. Your breath becomes shallow around certain people. Your jaw tightens. You feel alert without knowing why. You check your phone more often, not for information, but for reassurance. You feel a low-grade urgency that doesn't resolve even when nothing is wrong. Urgency without cause is one of the clearest signatures of acceleration. Another signal appears in how you plan, or rather, how you stop planning. The future begins to feel vague, not frightening, just undefined. You postpone decisions, you delay projects, you tell yourself you'll figure things out later. And later never quite arrives because the present keeps demanding attention. When time is healthy, the future feels reachable. When time accelerates, the future collapses into the next interaction. You may also notice that your sense of self becomes quieter, not erased, just muted. Your opinions soften. Your preferences feel less urgent. You adapt easily, perhaps too easily. You become agreeable, flexible, responsive. You pride yourself on this, on being easy to be around, on not needing much. But ease can be a form of disappearance. A life that expands you sharpens your sense of self. A life that accelerates you blurs it. Pay attention to what happens after interactions. Do you feel clearer or foggier, energized or drained in a way sleep doesn't fix? Do you leave with insight or with adrenaline? Do you remember what was said or only how it felt? Memory quality is the most reliable diagnostic tool you have. Connections that deepen time leave residue. Images, words, lessons, even difficult moments become textured. They integrate. You grow around them. Accelerated connections leave intensity but little structure, heat without light. You feel something happened, but you cannot say what changed. This is why so many people stay trapped in fast time. They mistake intensity for evidence. They assume that because something feels powerful, it must be meaningful. But power and meaning are not the same. Meaning accumulates slowly. It needs repetition, reflection, space. Power arrives quickly and demands attention. One builds a life, the other consumes it. The most painful recognition often comes when you compare parallel timelines. Who were you before this dynamic began? What did your days feel like? How did you remember your weeks? What did you create? Who did you see? And who are you now? This comparison is uncomfortable because it reveals a truth no one wants to admit. Time loss rarely feels like loss while it's happening. It feels like momentum. And momentum is celebrated in modern life. Faster is better, busier is admirable, stillness is suspicious. We have built a culture that rewards acceleration and calls it ambition. But your nervous system does not care about culture, it cares about sustainability. There is a reason ancient traditions treated time with reverence. Sabbaths, fasts, retreats, ritual pauses. These were not moral rules. They were technologies for protecting duration, for preventing life from collapsing into motion. When you remove all pauses, life becomes uninhabitable. You move through it, but you do not live inside it. Learning to spot acceleration is an act of self-respect. It is choosing to notice when your inner clock is being hijacked by external rhythms. It is allowing yourself to ask a radical question in a world that glorifies speed. Is this making my life longer or shorter? Not in years, in experience. Sometimes, the answer will surprise you. Some of the most dramatic, exciting, all-consuming connections will be the ones that leave you with the least to remember. And some of the quietest, least thrilling presences will be the ones that give your life back its weight. This is not a call to withdraw from intensity entirely. It is a call to choose it consciously, to stop confusing acceleration with aliveness, to stop equating urgency with importance. In the final stretch of this exploration, we will talk about what it means to reclaim time fully, not by cutting people out, but by changing your relationship to attention, pace, and presence, by learning how to slow time without shrinking your life. Because time does not need to be conquered, it needs to be inhabited. There comes a moment when awareness turns into responsibility, when you can no longer say you didn't know, when the pattern reveals itself clearly enough that continuing it would be a choice, not an accident. This is the moment where time stops being something that happens to you and starts becoming something you must actively protect. Reclaiming time does not begin with dramatic exits or confrontations. It begins quietly, internally, with a shift in allegiance, away from urgency, away from intensity for its own sake, toward presence. The first thing that must change is your relationship with attention. Attention is the currency of time. Wherever it goes, time follows. If your attention is constantly pulled outward, toward other people's moods, needs, expectations, your time will never feel like it belongs to you. You will live reactively, always slightly late to your own life. Reclaiming attention means allowing pauses, not filling every silence, not responding immediately, letting messages wait, letting emotions settle before acting on them. This may feel uncomfortable at first. It may even feel wrong. But discomfort is often the signal that a nervous system is relearning balance. Notice how quickly acceleration tries to reassert itself. The urge to explain, to justify, to smooth things over, to maintain momentum. These impulses are not moral, they are conditioned. They were learned in fast time, and they fade in slow time. Another essential shift happens in how you mark your days. Accelerated time erases landmarks. Everything blends together. So you must begin creating anchors, simple, repeatable rituals that give days texture. Morning walks, journaling, cooking, reading, conversations that are not urgent, activities with no outcome beyond presence. These anchors do something profound. They thicken time. When time thickens, memory improves. When memory improves, identity stabilizes. And when identity stabilizes, you become less vulnerable to acceleration. You are no longer pulled as easily into other people's gravitational fields because your own has weight. Boundaries are often misunderstood here. They are not walls, they are rhythms. They are decisions about pace, about how quickly you move, how much you give, how often you engage. A boundary is simply a statement that your time has value, even when nothing dramatic is happening. You may notice resistance when you change your pace. Others may feel unsettled, not because you were doing something wrong, but because the system you were part of depended on your responsiveness. When you slow down, you reveal imbalances that were previously hidden by speed. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. Sometimes, slowing time feels like loss to those who relied on your acceleration. But protecting your time is not abandonment, it is self-continuation. There is also grief in this process. Grief for the years that move too fast, for the moments you can't fully remember, for the version of yourself that lived reactively, believing speed was safety. This grief is not something to avoid. It is evidence that time is becoming real again. Grief slows time in a different way. It deepens it. As you grieve, you may feel tempted to rush through the feeling, to distract yourself, to find a new accelerator. This is the old pattern trying to survive. Stay. Let the slowness teach you what it was meant to teach all along. What emerges on the other side is not dullness, it is clarity. You begin to notice which connections leave you with more life than you started with, which conversations expand rather than consume, which people allow silence without filling it, which environments let your nervous system rest. These are not always the most exciting spaces, but they are the ones where time accumulates rather than evaporates. This is where the deepest reframe occurs. A meaningful life is not one filled with constant stimulation. It is one that leaves you with memories that feel lived in, a life you can remember inhabiting. You start to understand that time is not something you manage, it is something you participate in, and participation requires consent. You are allowed to say no to acceleration. You are allowed to choose a slower rhythm even in a fast world. You are allowed to value presence over momentum, memory over intensity, depth over speed. This choice will not make your life smaller. It will make it longer. Because the opposite of acceleration is not stagnation. It is integration. And integrated time builds something acceleration never can. A self that feels continuous, grounded, and real. In the final segment, we will bring everything together, not as a warning, but as an invitation to step out of fast forward and into a life that does not disappear as you live it. What if the greatest illusion of modern life is not that time is scarce, but that it is supposed to move quickly? What if we have been taught to accept acceleration as maturity, exhaustion as success, and disappearance as normal? When you step back far enough, you begin to see the shape of it, not just in your own life, but everywhere. Conversations that end before they settle, relationships that burn bright and vanish, days that pass without leaving a trace. We are surrounded by motion, yet starved of duration. And in that environment, time accelerators flourish, not because they are rare, but because they are rewarded. They move fast, they generate urgency, they make life feel important. They fill space so completely that no one has to ask the uncomfortable questions. They turn existence into momentum. And momentum feels like meaning when meaning is absent. But momentum does not remember you. Only time you inhabit remembers you. This is the quiet truth waiting beneath everything we've explored. Time is not just something you pass through. It is something that passes through you. And whatever you do not allow to pass slowly enough to be felt will not become part of who you are. This is why the end of acceleration often feels like waking up. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with a strange clarity that makes the past look unreal. You realize how long you were moving without arriving, how much you were reacting without choosing, how many moments you lived without ever fully being there. And this realization can be painful because it confronts you with a loss that has no single cause, no villain, no moment you can point to and say, that's when it happened. Time loss is cumulative. It happens politely, quietly, one hurried moment at a time. But here is the other side of that truth. If time can be lost gradually, it can also be reclaimed gradually. Not by slowing the clock, but by changing how you meet it. When you stop feeding acceleration, something unexpected happens. Life does not collapse into boredom. It opens. Space returns. You notice the weight of a morning, the difference between days, the subtle growth that only appears when nothing is rushing it along. You begin to recognize which connections expand you and which compress you, which people allow you to arrive as you are, and which require constant adjustment, which environments let time breathe, and which steal it without asking. This awareness changes everything, because once you feel the difference, you cannot unfeel it. You stop chasing intensity for its own sake. You stop equating urgency with importance. You stop mistaking stimulation for life. And in that stopping, time begins to thicken again. Moments become inhabitable. Memory returns. You don't just know that something happened. You remember how it unfolded, how it felt, how it changed you. Life becomes less cinematic, perhaps, but more real. And real life has weight. The most profound shift is this. You stop measuring your existence by how much you experience, and start measuring it by how much you remember living. This is where the fear dissolves. The fear that if you slow down, you will miss out, because you realize that acceleration was what made you miss out in the first place. It made you skim your own life instead of reading it. There will always be people who move fast, who live on urgency, who cannot tolerate stillness. You do not need to judge them. You do not need to rescue them. You only need to decide how close you stand. Distance is not rejection. It is calibration. You are allowed to choose a pace that lets you exist. In a universe where time bends under pressure, choosing gentleness is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is understanding that what stretches time is not force, but presence. So if you take nothing else from this journey, take this with you. Time does not disappear because life is short. It disappears because we live it too quickly to feel, and feeling is the only proof we were ever here. Stay with your moments long enough for them to become yours. Let your life move at a speed you can remember. And if you ever find yourself around someone who makes time vanish, pause, not to accuse, not to analyze, just to notice. Because the moment you notice, acceleration loses its grip, and time, patiently, begins to return.